So I just got back from the brand new Triumph Trident 660 launch in Tenerife, and it's a bike that I've been really looking forward to riding after months of build-up, and I'm happy to report that it didn't disappoint. In fact, I'd argue that Triumph absolutely nailed the brief with this one. So in today's video, I'll tell you exactly why I think the Trident is probably now the best affordable middleweight naked motorcycle on the market. But it's important to set your expectations for this bike. If you want fully adjustable suspension, super sharp top spec brakes and 120 horsepower, then Triumph already have the Street Triple. We've had a number of press briefings from Triumph about the Trident, and they've been super clear that this bike isn't necessarily intended for more experienced riders. It's actually for three other categories of customer. Firstly, new, younger bikers for whom it'll be their only mode of transport. Secondly, a slightly older customer who's new to biking but most likely has a car as well. And lastly, a second bike for existing bikers, maybe as something to commute on or ride through winter, or perhaps something more manageable if you have a big adventure bike as your main machine. The problem is though, there are already loads of good options in this market. There's Suzuki's SV650 and Kawasaki's Z650, both at a super affordable price point. The Honda CB650R costs a bit more but has 94 horsepower peak from its Revy inline 4. And then of course there's the Yamaha MT-07, a punchy parallel twin that's extremely popular for its playful nature. So how can Triumph realistically cut through in a market that's already well served by some awesome little bikes? With the Trident, they've played to their strengths by taking the characteristics that make the Street Triple so popular and delivering them at a competitive price by choosing more appropriate components and materials for this market. So I'm going to focus on three key areas in which Triumph have managed to set this bike apart: the engine, the chassis and the finish. A quick recap on the specs of this engine then. It's a triple of course with 660 cc's of displacement, but don't be fooled into thinking that it's the same 660 triple lifted out of the Street Triple S. Most of the components are new and they've done that to give it a different character based on the target audience. Whereas the Street Triple S's A2 license focus with 47 horsepower and 60 Nm of peak torque, the Trident is capable of 80 horsepower peak and a touch more torque at 64 Nm. But Triumph say that 90% of that peak torque is produced right across the rev range, and that makes it an easy bike for beginners to ride without having to always be in the optimal gear. Triumph are always keen to push the benefits of the triple cylinder layout, claiming that it has more revvy power than a twin, yet more low down grunt than an inline 4, making it the perfect balance. But I have to say that it really is the case with the Trident. 80 horsepower is a sweet amount of power for the road, as you can really feel like you're pushing it hard without hitting silly speeds. At the same time, it's still satisfying to keep the Trident high up in the revs to get the most out of the engine, and it'll still reward you with a lively response. But if you do want to take it easy and keep it in third whilst driving out of a corner, it'll happily do so with a nice, smooth, torquey delivery. There are plenty of switchbacks and sweeping bends as you ride up over Mount Teddy, so there was plenty of chance on our day of riding to get a feel for the Trident in a real range of riding scenarios. I can only describe it as pure fun. No fear of it spitting you off or picking up ridiculous speeds, just a nice silky mid-range but still with enough of a rush at the top end to put a smile on your face. On top of that, the slip assist clutch feels light at the lever, the gearbox is as refined as you'd expect, and the throttle response feels smooth, if a tiny bit laggy, with that whopping great restrictive Euro 5 exhaust. There are two riding modes of road and rain which you won't find anywhere else in the market, both of which affect throttle map and traction control. The TC kicked in a couple of times pulling out of a dusty or gravelly lay-by, so it does its job, but it's not at all invasive on the road, and it is switchable if you want to pop the front end up. So back to the brief that I talked about at the start of this video. Is it good for beginners, young and old? I'd say so. It's a more forgiving and friendly engine than something like the Street Triple R or RS. And if you're feeling super cautious, you could always stick it in rain mode, which gives you that less aggressive throttle response. But what about as a second bike for those of us who already ride? Keep the revs up and it still delivers, especially in this nice little nimble chassis. Granted, you can see where they've managed to keep the price down versus the Street Triple. Gone are the aluminium frame and swing arm in favour of steel. Suspension is from Showa, and although the 41mm fork looks similar on the face of it, there's no adjustability, only preload on the shock. And the brakes are from Nissin with a pair of 2-pot calipers on 3 10mm discs at the front, as opposed to the radially mounted 4-pot Brembos on the Street Triples. But Triumph know how to make a bike handle, and just because the materials and components are spec to a price, it doesn't mean that this bike bypasses all that knowledge. The riding position is more relaxed and comfortable than a Street Triple, with wider swept back bars, lower foot pegs and a 5mm lower seat height of 805mm, but it still handles like an absolute peach. In fact, it's the definition of the word nippy. As soon as we rolled off the forecourt of the hotel, it was immediately noticeable just how easy it was to maneuver at low speeds, with a slender wet weight of 189 kilograms and a nice stable feel. And as we started to wind up over the mountain and the pace picked up, I found it to be a real treat through the corners. Just point it where you want it to go and it will gladly follow. Now, I have ridden that road before, but it was long enough ago to completely forget it, so occasionally you're coming into a turn a little quicker than you'd like, or having to tweak your line on a blind corner that tightened, and it rarely flustered the Trident. I'm about 80 kilograms, and the suspension setup felt sweet, so perhaps it's only riders at either end of the weight spectrum who will miss the adjustment, or if you're really pushing on. As for the brakes, this was where I was expecting the Trident to come up short. On paper, the braking looks under spec, with the likes of the CB650R offering 4-pot radially mounted Nissin calipers. But honestly, and I know I sound like I'm being extremely positive about this bike, but they didn't feel under spec on the road. There's a nice initial bite, plenty of feel, and ABS is of course on hand if you need it, but like the traction control, it doesn't feel too keen. The entire package really feels like Triumph have applied everything they know about making sweet handling roadsters from over the past few decades. That lightweight, slender feel results in something that's very accessible for novice riders, whilst the poise through corners is satisfying enough for any ability. If any part of the market is likely to buy a bike based on its looks, it's the novice surely. They're obviously less well read on the finer points of motorcycle specs and equipment, and therefore much more prone to walking into a dealer and picking the best looking bike that's in their budget. Now, I have to admit, when I saw the prototype version that Triumph first unveiled, which had been painted entirely white, I wasn't sold straight away. But after spending a few days taking videos and photos of the bike and reviewing the footage, it's grown on me massively. Personally, I like retro bikes, I own a Street Twin, and I like the classic proportions of a motorcycle. When I compare the Trident to a more modern bike like the Street Triple, it just looks right. It looks clean, uncluttered, and I love the shortness of the front end and tail section. The little touches are there too. LED lighting all round looks great, and the Triumph logos on the bar clamp, filler cap, engine cases and in the brake light all add a more premium feel than the price tag suggests. And the choice of finishes, particularly this matte black version, looks spot on to me. When you're actually on the bike, you don't see all that, but they've nailed the dash too. From what I can gather from the comments on most of my videos, you lot seem to value something that's clear and easy to read over flashy and overly styled, and I'd have to agree. The Trident does this with a super contrasty reverse LCD which shows revs, speed and fuel in the top half of the dash. It's so punchy that it's easy to read even in bright conditions like a clear day in Tenerife, and the simplicity makes it quick to interpret at a glance. The bottom half of the dash hosts the usual lights as well as a small square TFT screen. Whilst riding, it clearly shows your gear position, and you can also change riding modes and go through the menus, but should you wish to stump up the extra 200 quid, you can also add the ability to pair with your phone for navigation prompts and phone and media control. Unfortunately, we didn't get to test it out, but I did see a demo the night before the ride and it looked pretty decent. I'd like to give it a proper review, but on the face of it, it looks like good value given that a simple navigation device like the Beeline Moto costs about 150 quid, and that doesn't include controlling your phone or music, and it's another device to remember and keep charged. Other accessories include an up and down quick shifter, pillion grab rails and heated grips. There's no exhaust accessory however, and Triumph say that that's because there's little they can do beyond the standard exhaust with the heavy restrictions on noise emissions that are part of Euro 5. And to be fair, it does sound pretty sweet in stock form. Honestly, I'm struggling to find anything I didn't really like about the Trident. I was expecting the brakes to feel a bit weak, but they weren't. Perhaps the steel frame wouldn't feel as nimble as the Street Triple, but it pretty much is. I guess the only reason you might buy one of the competitors is the price. The Trident is at the top end of the market, with the Kawasaki Z650, for example, costing over 500 quid less. And once you add a couple of accessories and perhaps 100 quid for one of the more premium paint jobs, then it can start to add up quickly. Whether it's worth it depends on what you're looking for from a bike, but personally I'd find the Trident hard to resist. If you're looking for a bike in this segment, I'd strongly recommend that you at least take one for a spin before you pull the trigger. As always, I'd love to know what you guys think of it down in the comments below. Let me know if you've got any questions about this first ride, and I'll try to get back to as many of you as possible. And if you're new here and you want to see more videos like this, hit subscribe and I'll catch you next time.